Our officers and audio staff that live streaming has commenced. Thank you. Good evening, councillors, members of the gallery, and viewers live streaming tonight. My name is Councillor Linda Messina, and I'm the Mayor of Darebin City Council and chairperson of tonight's special council meeting. This is a special council meeting is to consider a report on the council plan and the financial plan deliberative engagement. This will be the only business considered at this meeting, special meeting. I now declare that this meeting open at 6:01 p.m. Membership is, first of all, actually I should do a welcome. Darebin City Council acknowledges the Wurundjeri Wurrung people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters we now call Darebin, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. Council pays respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Darebin. Council recognises and pays tribute to the diverse culture, resilience and heritage of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We acknowledge the leadership of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities and the right to self-determination in the spirit of mutual understanding and respect. The health and safety and well-being of the community has and always be paramount consideration of this council. Council continues to be guided by government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing for the health and well-being of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. This meeting will be open to the public in line with current health restrictions. This meeting is now being live streamed via the link on the council website, so the public will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the council website as soon as practical after the meeting. Before we begin tonight, I want to set out my expectations in regards to our behaviour and the language we use and remind councillors of our obligations under the Code of Conduct. At Darebin, we pride ourselves on being progressive and contemporary council. In the interest of demonstrating leadership, I have high expectations and that we will all be professional in our conduct and the language we use throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. Chamber is both a workplace and a public space, and we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. Item number 1, membership. I would like to introduce councillors today in attendance. Councillor Gaetano Greco, the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Tom Hannon, Councillor Tim Lawrence, Councillor Trent McCarthy, Councillor Suzanne Newton, Councillor Susan Rennie and Councillor Julie Williams. Item number 2, apologies. Councillor Emily Demetriadis is an apology this evening. Item 3, disclosures of conflicts of interest. Councillors and officers are here for the interest or disclosures. Are there any interest or disclosure conflicts of interest to declare? Noted. Thank you. As there are no conflicts of interest, I'll now move to the confirmation of last previous council meetings. Do we have a motion, please, councillors? Moved by Councillor Rennie, seconded by Councillor Williams. All those in favour? That is carried. We only have one report to consider this evening. It's item number 4.1, Council Plan and Financial Plan Deliberative Engagement. We have Anita Craven, who is there for any questions. Do we have any questions to Ms Craven, please, councillors? There are none. Do I have a motion? Moved by Councillor McCarthy, second by Councillor Rennie. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm moving the officer's recommendation as listed in the report. And as councillors would know, it is a requirement for council to identify dilemmas to be put to the community panel for their consideration. In terms of identifying dilemmas that have the right qualities, it is really important for council to recognise the work that we're actually connected to here, which of course is both the council plan, the budget, and of course the municipal health and wellbeing plan. And I'm pleased with the dilemmas that have been put forward as proposed. One of those involves allowing our community panel to provide us with insightful feedback in relation to aspects of the waste services dilemma as outlined. And what is important here is that council faces obviously some serious challenges, both in terms of community expectation about the waste service, our move towards a circular economy, and of course how we should ensure that we continue to keep an eye on those who face disadvantage. We want to ensure that when we are making decisions about this in the future, that those decisions are informed by the sort of input that we would have through the community panel, and obviously strong evidence as well. In relation to community safety, once again, here is an opportunity for council to look at the role that council will have in providing a safe community, and what that value is that the community panel sees for us in that, and of course how we think about public space and the community safety that we can ensure and provide. So in relation to both of the proposed dilemmas, both of them meet the criteria for the sorts of things that we need to be speaking about. Consideration, obviously, for the financial aspects facing the city, tying back into the work that council is doing around its vision, and of course its council plan, and of course thinking about the municipal health and wellbeing plan as well. I would also just note that this is a new process for council. We haven't undertaken this process before, so in doing so we've sought to provide dilemmas through this, as proposed in this report, that are meaningful, that actually provide members of the community from their diverse backgrounds with an opportunity to provide input, and of course also really present a challenge to council to not just assume that we know all the answers from the get-go, but in fact to be open to what the panel has to say to us. And that's the critical thing here. There's no point asking people a question about something unless you're prepared to hear the answer, even if that answer is uncomfortable. And I think for me that is what both of these dilemmas represent. The challenges that we face and challenges that our community faces, not just now but into the near future, but we need to start making planning and making policy and developing ideas and solutions going forward. I'll end it there, Mayor, other than just to say thank you obviously to the community panel for their continued involvement, but also to our officers for their work in putting this together.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lawrence?
I've got an amendment.
Would you like, have you circulated, is it the circulation that you addressed a few hours ago?
Yes.
Can I confirm that that is your amendment?
Yes, Mayor Messina, I'd like to just move the first part of this amendment, which is to strike out dot point 1 in section 1.
Okay, so at this particular stage, what we're doing is removing item 3. Is that correct? And only, and just, sorry, just item, just one moment, let me just check that. No, so we're removing item 3 completely, and we're only, in terms of what's going to be acceptable to the mover and the seconder. So item 3, is that correct? And we're just looking at the striking out of the first line, is that correct?
I'm just seeking to move one clean amendment, striking out the dot point 1 in the section 1, and then I'll deal with the next one
all right.
after that.
Do we get that, councillors? Yeah, we'll just wait for the... Remove point 3. It'll be a second amendment. So we'll be debating. Councillor Lawrence, can I just confirm that is your amendment?
Yes.
Thank you. Is that acceptable to the mover and the seconder?
No.
No.
Do we have a seconder for Councillor Lawrence's amendment? Seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence, would you like to speak to your amendment?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Messina. Yes, look, I understand in terms of the deliberative panel, we have limited time when they can consider 3 items, and we heard back that the waste item was drafted in such a complex way that we could only consider 2 items, that is the waste, and then that would actually dislodge other items. That I'm trying to mediate that exclusion of issues that concern our community by shortening some of this first waste item, which had expanded into quite a complex set of questions. And I believe that the first point needed to be deleted because I wasn't comfortable with the wording. It's almost putting the burden on the deliberative panel to endorse full cost absorption of waste changes. And we know the waste changes are coming from the added costs of landfill and also through consumer behaviour. So these are real costs that are happening, and I just didn't feel comfortable with trying to sort of almost prejudge an outcome with the committee there. But the other issues of circular economy and the other issues about how much we share the burden in terms of between residents of disadvantage, I thought were worthy points. So that's my first motion, is just to delete that first dot point on full costs.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Madam Messina, I will reserve my right to speak.
Do we have any further speakers? Councillor Newton.
Through you, is this working?
I
Through
don't
you,
think
Mayor.
Councillor Newton's... Can you try that again? Oh, it's now working.
Just testing that? Yep, okay.
Great. Can we start the clock now, please?
Thank you. So I'd like to speak against the amendment. So what we're asking the panel to do is look at dilemmas. So a dilemma is something that's really hard. It's hard for us and it'll be hard for them, but I'm quite confident that they'll come back with some really interesting ideas. So the reason why I think we should accept the question, what is the community prepared to accept to cover the full cost and also increasing cost of the waste service, is because it's one of the hardest things that we're grappling with. So what we've got, particularly after the China sword issue, is that waste is taking up a bigger and bigger part of our pie, and we really have to look at it carefully. If that's increasing, what can we do to, reduce waste, increase recycling, everything else? And so for me, there is an aspect to this that is hard for the 9 of us around this table. So I think the knowledge that we could bring from 39 or 40, whatever it's up to now, people around the panel table, I would absolutely love to hear their opinions. So I think for that reason, I think we should ask them.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. For me, the first question and the third question are directly linked. And as councillors would see from the report, the cost to deliver the current waste service, which we face at the moment, we expect an increase from the current amount of 16 million per year to around 25 million per year in 10 years' time. The first question, which is struck out in Councillor Lawrence's amendment, effectively asks a really important question to our community, and we will need to consult further on this, no doubt. But in the first instance, provides the panel with the chance to give us some wisdom and some insight and some feedback, which is that when we look at this situation and we look at the almost inevitable rising cost of this service, how do we think about who pays for this, how they pay for it, and on what basis? But the second part of that question, which is also really important, is in terms of an increased cost, is it correct that we should be thinking simply about maintaining the service levels as they currently stand, or increasing them, varying them in some way, or is there a different service offering that the community is wanting to put forward? So in terms of actually grappling with the reality of the waste charges and the waste challenges that we face in the future, that first question is really important, and I don't believe we should be striking it out. If Councillor Lawrence wishes to put forward an alternative or an additional point for us to consider to put to the panel, I'm open to hearing the arguments for that, but I do not support removing this first point, because otherwise we are only asking half the question of the community panel when it comes to waste, and not the full question. So I'd urge councillors to keep that first point in, and we can consider the other amendment on its merits.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. Look, I'm happy to support the amendment that Councillor Lawrence has put up. I think that the question and the dilemmas and the way that Councillor Lawrence has framed them, it provides for they're much more open question, and also it doesn't in any way, and I'm not saying that the previous questions did, that in any way we can be accused of either directing the discussion of the panel in a particular direction or otherwise. I think that the way that Councillor Lawrence has worded it will pick up on a lot of issues that have got to do both with the circular economy, waste, and how we deal with that in the future. And it actually leaves it to the panel to consider which direction they want to take that particular dilemma, rather than if you like, suggesting ways forward and things like that. And so I think we need to keep the questions to the panel as broad as possible. The panel is quite diverse, and we've made it even more diverse in recent time. And I think that deserves, in turn, questions that are broad enough, therefore, to pick up a broad debate and pick up the various aspects in relation to the 2 points that have been suggested up there in Councillor Lawrence's amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Oh, Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. I'm in favour also of retaining this point in this dilemma. We've got the most extraordinary panel who have come together to deal with complex issues in our municipality. And having met a number of panel meeting members at the session that Council had with members of that panel, I have confidence that this is a group of people who can add significant value to this discussion in relation to waste. The reality is the community is already covering the full cost of waste through rates. Increasingly, as time goes on, that is going to be at the expense of other services because, as was mentioned, the proportion of the pie going to waste is increasing. And I am very, very keen to hear from this diverse group of people from our community who make up the panel what their thoughts are about this and how they see this becoming more acceptable. What is it that we do with this burden? How do we distribute it? And if people are going to pay more, do they want more service? And are they willing to pay for it? What are the sort of different issues to tease out? I think that we don't do the panel a service. In fact, we do them a great disservice if we suggest that they aren't capable of dealing with this complex and incredibly challenging issue. It is one that is going to confront all of us. I don't have a sense of where it will land, and I don't have the answers myself. And in situations where I feel I don't have the answers, actually harnessing the knowledge, the perspectives, the voice of so many different community members is incredibly valuable. I personally, on an individual level, would welcome their thoughts and wisdom, and I believe this
10 seconds.
council would benefit from their thoughts and wisdom.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any further speakers? Councillors, as there are no further speakers, we will be voting on this particular amendment submitted by Councillor Lawrence. All those in favour? All those against? Against is Councillor Tom Hannon, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Messina, Councillor Newton, Councillor Rennie. All those for are Councillor Williams, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Greco. That motion is not carried. Councillor Lawrence?
I have another amendment.
Yep, it's just the additional of item 3. Just one moment. Just want to read that, just one moment. Councillor Lawrence, can I just confirm? We need to remove. Oh no, that's correct. Councillor Lawrence, can I just confirm that your addition is item number 3?
This is my second motion, amendment, which is just to add an additional point 3, which was one of the options given to councillors.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder?
Sorry, Mayor, before it's seconded, can I just check? I'm not comfortable considering this with the way that it's worded because I don't think it's clear. The phrasing is not the same as points 1 and 2, and I'm concerned. So can I ask if Councillor Lawrence can give some thought to rewording this to actually be
What are your
consistent?
suggestions, Councillor McCarthy?
Well, I think that if I'm correct, Mayor, points 1 and 2 have very specific wording, which is endorse the following community safety dilemmas. So I think Councillor Lawrence is suggesting we endorse an equity and disadvantage dilemma. I don't want to do the job for Councillor Lawrence. I think it's really on him to put it forward if he wishes.
This is the wording from the officers without changing, so I'm happy to accept any changes you want to make to the officers.
Can we perhaps, before we enter, can we ask a question of Ms Craven before we enter into the debate? Can I just confirm that, in fact, item 3 was listed prior in the officer's recommendation?
Through you, Mayor, yes it was. I think what I can circulate to councillors is so it's consistent with point 1 and 2 in terms of the language, if you would like me to do that.
We could take a few minutes to do that. Thank you, Ms Craven. So we'll just take a few minutes for that to occur. Just be a few more minutes, councillors. Better we get it right. Endorses the following generic. Is that correct, Ms Craven? Yep. Councillor Lawrence, can I just confirm that that is your amendment
Yes,
now?
happy to. It's still the same substance, but it matches with the other wording.
Fantastic. Seconded by Councillor Greco. Is that acceptable to the mover? I'll just give the mover and a seconder a few minutes.
Sorry, Mayor.
It's been seconded, so no, it wasn't accepted, but it already has a seconder, so we can
Okay.
move to debate.
The reference that Councillor Lawrence had in there before to women, multicultural communities
Oh, that's gone.
has all disappeared. Sorry, I'm kind of not clear on what's
Actually, it
happening
has
now.
gone, yes.
Through you, Mayor. So what was originally there was in the body of the report. It actually, so the 1 and 2, the context around the dilemmas were in the body of the report. They weren't in the recommendation. So what I've put forward is for consistency is just around the actual dilemma we'll be asking the panel to consider, which is the dot point, which relates to the generating equity to address disadvantage. So it's consistent with point 1 and 2. What was in the previous one was from the body of the rationale behind the actual dilemma.
Does that accept, Councillor Lawrence?
That's clear to me. Obviously, it's in the hands of other councillors.
Yep. And Councillor Greco? Okay. Do we have, would you like to speak to your amendment, Councillor Lawrence?
Yes, Mayor Messina, I've obviously been guided by officers in terms of the actual work that it takes for the deliberative panel to deal with these issues, and that waste was a 3-point issue, so that was going to take up more time, and that we could only address one other social issue, which we've selected the community safety. But I still think that multiculturalism and income inequality in the city and disadvantage are issues we need to grapple with. And they're not distant issues, and they're not non-core issues for this council. In fact, when we're endorsing our budget and council plan, our entire meeting was brought to a halt by a single homeless person. And that, for me, was a real message that while we're juggling all these millions of dollars and we're talking about all these wonderful things and these aspirational things and extra trees and all that, we're facing a dilemma of inequality in this city that cuts through culture, cuts through income, cuts through gender, and the end result of it, of this inflated housing prices and this lack of inequality through our city, is incredible homelessness and dysfunction. So I think that inequality and disadvantage are things that we need to ask the deliberative panel about. I understand that, you know, the advice that we got, that we couldn't afford to put it in here, we didn't have time, but I'm suggesting we should make time and we should put it in.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Hannan.
Mayor Messina, I was the seconder of the...
Oh, okay, sorry. Okay.
But I'll reserve my right to speak.
Sorry,
I'll allow
apologies, I
Councillor
should have asked that. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Hannan, would you like to speak?
Thank you, Mayor. Sorry, I was a little eager there, but look, I do support this amendment, and I thank Councillor Lawrence for putting it forward.
Yeah.
Because I think it speaks to a really important set of issues. So equity is an end in itself, and it's also it has been shown across the world to increase health and wellbeing outcomes where there is high levels of equity, not just for the disadvantaged in our community, but actually for the whole of the community. This question is a focus on equity, which there's so many bound up issues in that, which I think are very worthy of discussion of the deliberative panel. It goes to the heart of who we are as a city of Darebin and what our vision is for the future. It ties in issues such as gentrification and diversity. You know, how do we welcome the new developments while keeping what's important to us in a sustainable way? It also brings in elements of intergenerational equity, especially as we look about the 4-year plan and the 10-year financial plan, which goes to, you know, those kind of financial questions about, do we, you know, invest today to benefit the future, or take on or save today to have a better financial position for the future? These are really important issues, and while the council plan and, you know, our combined efforts have put a lot of work into, as it says there, a strong focus on addressing those equity issues. That's only one way of doing it. And there are many other ways of doing it. You know, do you target the top? Do you target the bottom? Do you go for fairness measures across the board? And I think it would be great to get the deliberative panel's views on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hannan. Are there any further speakers? Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm really pleased to hear Councillor Hannan's thinking around this, because for me this really is a significant question for Council. It's going to be difficult, I think, to grapple with all the dimensions, and so it'll be interesting to see what aspects the panel chooses to focus on in what is a very broad question. If I think about, and I work, as councillors know, I work professionally in the area of young people and employment, and if I think about the issues that are happening right now for young people in our city, the entrenched economic disadvantage that some young people in our city face because of their inability to enter the labour market, their inability to enter the housing market, and the fact that as a generation they may be the first generation in their family that can't afford to live in Darebin. And that's an interesting phenomenon, because their previous 2 generations of their family may have actually lived in Darebin, and they will be priced out, and they may not wish to live here. That's okay too. But the fact that that is economically not an option for them in some cases is a really interesting question for this council. Is that something that we wish to focus on in terms of housing affordability for young people, or do we wish to focus our efforts more on those who don't pay rates, who are never going to be in the property market, who are never going to actually even been in a situation to participate in these sorts of processes, because they are literally living from week to week. They are in dire situations. What is council's social responsibility in those cases, and where do we want to gear our efforts? And the third group that I would just mention that I know comes to mind for a lot of us in our community right now is those who have limited supports. A lot of our older residents who are heat vulnerable, at serious risk in coming years. How do we support and prepare them? Their disadvantage actually causes, their economic disadvantage also leads to health disadvantage, economic disadvantage, and the new area, of course, is the climate disadvantage. They are not able to keep themselves safe in dangerous situations. So interested to see what the panel comes back with. Happy to include this one in the way that it's shaped.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Are there any further speakers, councillors? Councillor Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor Messina. I'm actually going to speak against the inclusion of this third point, and there's a couple of reasons for that. Firstly, we've had advice from staff who have been working closely with the consultants who are facilitating the deliberative process that 3 issues is going to be too much for the panel to do justice to, and I feel that we should really listen to that advice. We want an extraordinary depth of thinking from our panel. We don't want them to skim over issues, and so I think it's a mistake to throw too much at them. The other concern that I have, and in many ways it's actually a more significant concern, is that I'm not convinced that this council wants to hear the advice that the deliberative panel might give back to us. I could look at our current draft budget that is coming to council, and I could easily find $3 million in that budget that we could divert towards equity and inclusion, which I would happily do so, I should say. $3 million worth of spending that is going primarily to property owners, to business owners, to other people who are not experiencing high levels of marginalisation and exclusion. And we've chosen as a council, and I will be voting in favour of the budget because we do need a budget, but we've chosen collectively to not prioritise equity, but instead to give away that money. And so I put it to everyone here, if you put forward this dilemma, are you willing to listen? If the panel comes back and says, cut the spending on big projects, we'd rather have social housing than, a boathouse at Edwards Lake. We'd rather have, more homelessness support than a global learning hub. Are you willing to listen? Because if you are not willing to listen, then you should not be voting for this dilemma. And I am not convinced that this council is willing to listen, and that's why I think that the work on equity is work for us to do as a council, not work that we should say we're supporting by giving to a panel.
It's time. Thank you, Councillor Rennie. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Member Messina. Look, I really support this amendment, and I think it's important that we look at equity and we look at social disadvantage in our city. As we know, not only in broader society, there's been a polarisation of disadvantage, and COVID has actually revealed some of the structural disadvantage that exist in our community. I think it's also important to note that even our own reports say that we have some of the lowest, from a socioeconomic perspective, some areas in our city are ranked the lowest in all of Australia from a socioeconomic perspective. That's quite, to put it bluntly, I think that's quite damning on a council like ours that needs to address these issues. We've often considered to be ourselves as a progressive council, and we're very proud of that. We've got a long tradition of being a progressive council, and I think it's only apt that we put this dilemma up to the panel, for the panel to actually consider this. It's also important to note that in all the council meetings that I've been, and I was thinking back and reflecting as other councillors were speaking, I don't think there's been one council meeting where we have not discussed socio-economic disadvantage in our city, whether through motions or policies or things like that. So I think because it's such an important part, and I believe that the council plan in itself is a way of addressing social disadvantage. So I would really like to hear from the panel in terms of, have we got our priorities right in terms of how we've ranked these issues. There's lots of issues there in the plan that look at social disadvantage. Which ones should we emphasise or focus more on? And I would like the panel to do this. And I think the panel actually welcome the opportunity to talk about these things, because if you look at the vision that the panel did come up with, they used the word equity. So if they've used that word in their original vision, you would assume that they would like to talk about these types of issues.
Councillor Greco. Councillors, as there's no further debate, I'm assuming, did you want to?
Through you, Mayor Messina, thank you. Just briefly, I'm going to speak against as well. Similar to Councillor Rennie, I'm not sure that we're willing to hear what the panel might come up with either, and I'm particularly thinking about the what should we do less of part of the amendment, where, you know, we do have some really big projects that we've put forward, and yeah, like Councillor Rennie said, if the panel comes back and says, well, we don't think you should do this big project because we think you should be spending more money on disadvantage generally, then I wonder what we will do with that. And so for me, I think the two first ones are pretty big already, and I think that we've given the panel quite a lot with those two. I think this one is, I'm not sure it's one that we're ready to hear back from.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? Councillors, that's the end of the debate. We now put that to the vote. All those in favour of Councillor Lawrence's amendment? That's Councillor Hannan, Councillor Williams, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Messina, Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Greco. All those against? Councillor Newton and Councillor Rennie. That motion is carried. Now, councillors, we move to the substantive motion. We've heard from the mover, and I think we heard from the seconder. Is that correct, Councillor Rennie? No. So does anybody wish to speak to the new substantive motion? Councillors, do we put that to the vote then? All those in favour? Thank you, councillors. That's voted unanimously. We have no further items to debate. Councillors, I declare that the council meeting is closed at 6:37 p.m. Thank you. We will take a 5-minute recess and then we'll go to the planning committee meeting.